We'll take a deep dive into the Old Testament, particularly looking at messianic prophecies that illustrate so clearly someone we may know. Okay, so we'll explore what this all means with some figures, some probabilities. Could this all just have happened by chance? And I'll leave you with a question to ponder. But first, we'll look at the core message of the Old Testament. What is the Old Testament about? Simply, a promise of a saving Messiah. So it's magnificent in and of itself that so many books by so many writers over so many years has reached a single message. One of a Messiah to save mankind. So I'd like to look quickly at what Messiah means. Anyone know? Messiah, the definition? Savior? Anointed. Fantastic. Anointed. Anyone know what the Greek word for anointed is? Christos, or how we are familiar with it, Christ. So, the Old Testament actually doesn't use Messiah, the word, much, but they use a lot of other titles that all refer to the Messiah. Son of God, Son of Man, Son of David, a prophet like Moses, the seed. And these are all referring to one individual. And this isn't kind of what we're saying. This is ancient rabbis and even modern day rabbis would acknowledge and accept these names as referring to the same guy, the same Messiah. But there are lots of questions around this claim that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah, particularly that the Gentiles kind of just made all this up. Claiming that it's all fabricated, it's just looking too deep into Old Testament verses, saying they're prophecies when Jews would claim they're not. Is this true? So there's a few kind of answers to this kind of question. A traditional Jewish rabbi known as Rambam, that's the short version of his name. His actual name is quite long and I don't know how to say it. But if you look up Rambam, he'll come. He's a highly acclaimed teacher amongst the Jews from the 12th century. AD, and he set out 13 rules that the Jewish people or Jewish principles that the Orthodox Jews would follow. And one of them, and they still hold very strongly to these principles, and one of them said that the Jews must believe in the coming Messiah, awaiting for him every day with unwavering faith. So this idea that the Old Testament prophetic character of this Messiah is central to Judaism. And he goes on to say, anyone who does not believe in him, the Messiah, or does not await his coming, denies not only the statements of the other prophets, but those of the Torah and Moses, our teacher. So this is really entrenched in kind of Jewish teachings, that there is this Messiah coming and he has been depicted in the Old Testament. Alfred Edersheim, a Jewish convert, looked into this even more. He was in the 1800s, investigated how many times ancient rabbis quoted the Old Testament saying it's about Messiah. And he found 456 passages that rabbis quoted saying that that's about Messiah, that's about Messiah, that's about Messiah. That's one per day, and you'd still have 100 passages to contemplate by the end of the year. It's loads. They see it sometimes more than we do as Christians. They see the image of the Messiah in the Old Testament. So even if we look at rabbinic teaching after Christ, for example, in the Talmud that we talked about just before lunch, it claims that every prophecy and prophet spoke in the context of the Messianic era. All the prophets prophesied only in respect to the Messianic era. Now, this next one was very interesting. One of the documents found as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls collection is known as 4Q175, or the Testimonia. This piece of parchment depicted about 5 different texts put together, all in relation to the character of the Messiah. So, an ancient rabbi has done what we're going to do today, picked out some references from the Old Testament and said, this is about the Messiah, this is about the Messiah, this is about the Messiah. I wonder what he looks like. Even if we, this is what the early church kind of counted on. They counted on the idea that Jews know that the Messiah is prophesied to come and fulfill all these prophecies. Even if we look at Acts 3:24, St. Peter proclaims, yes, and all the prophets from Samuel and those who follow, as many as have spoken, have also foretold these days. So this is very clear in Jewish teaching. But another question that comes across is, did Jesus claim to be this messianic character? Well, he certainly did. These are the very scriptures that testify about me. Yet you refuse to come to me to have faith. But do not think I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom your hopes are set. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. So this is very, very clear that Jesus is claiming to be the prophesied Messiah that the Old Testament speaks of. So New Testament faith is based on the idea that Jesus is the Messiah of the Old Testament. Early church Christians would go into synagogues, open the Old Testament, and say, this is Jesus, this is Jesus, this is Jesus, this is Jesus. And that's how they would preach to the Jews. So just imagine if you were told to go preach Jesus to people using only the Old Testament. That's the early church. It highlights how vital this piece of text is to Christians. So, what are we going to do today about this? It's not a Gentile abuse of the Old Testament. It's not a hijacking of scriptures or twisting of meaning, but rather we are looking at what it always was and what it always was accepted to be, which is messianic prophecies. Who like playing Connect the Dots? Yeah? Connect the dots? Yeah? I still like doing that. Yeah. So that's what we're going to do next. Connect a handful of prophecies and see what shape or identity is formed. So we'll start at the very beginning, the very first prophecy. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The descendant of Eve will defeat this evil. One particular seed, singular, will defeat the serpent, so the serpent itself, not his descendants. So what is being said here basically is the coming one has to be a human male. That's a very broad brush. Now every human male is potentially the Messiah. So let's narrow this down. In Genesis, we can trace the reference of this word seed as being the first kind of descendant of Abraham, then Isaac, and then we have this verse in Numbers. I see him, but do not know. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Here we see Messiah being prophesied to be again later on, specifically from the tribe of Judah. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of people. So we can see Judah was the royal line of all kings from the tribe of Judah. The royal line for Israel always comes from the tribe of Judah. And here it says people, referring to all nations. So not just Jews. So it's an interesting question posed here. When in history did the tribe of Judah stop ruling Israel? So again, also of note is the genealogies of the Jewish people was kind of they always kept kind of a record of which tribe each people was from, because of these prophecies. It's very important that they know who the Messiah is, and to check that he's from the tribe of Judah. But these records have been lost along with the temple in 70 AD. So you have to kind of wonder, well, has he come yet? How do we know if he's coming now? How will we know if he is from the tribe of Judah? But let's narrow this down even further to the house of Jesse in Isaiah. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. Then it goes on, specifically the house of David, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. So when it comes to King David, there are tons of scriptures that are so many references that the Messiah, being a descendant of David, that he becomes known as the Son of David. It becomes a messianic title. And this was so entrenched in the minds of the Jews, even during Jesus' time. Jesus asked them, saying, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The Son of David." So this Davidic line is so important in Jewish tradition, so much so that we have 2 genealogies tracing the ancestors of Jesus all the way back to David, both from Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph, to kind of avoid any confusion. But interesting what about this kind of forever throne that's being alluded to? So we have here, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forth, even forever. The seal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So a single eternal ruler from the line of David. So was Jesus a king? He may not have looked like one in the earthly sense, but his very death and conviction was based on this royal claim and was explicitly labeled as the King of the Jews. Right, okay, so let's carry on. A prophet. So not only is this Messiah kingly, but also had prophetic priestly qualities like Moses. I'll raise you up from a prophet like you, Moses, from among their brethren, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I'll require it of him. But you think, well, so what? God has raised so many prophets like Moses. But towards the end of Deuteronomy, it declares that this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. So rabbinic and Jewish literature teach that this was a reference to the Messiah. He'll be called a prophet like Moses. Again, this is very well known amongst the Jews. In Mark 6:15, people were wondering who Jesus was. Some would say, he is the prophet, capital P, referring to this prophecy. So what did Moses do? He came and first introduced himself as the deliverer. Then he was rejected. Then went to Gentile lands where he prospered. So you see where I'm going with this. Then he came back for the second time, and when he was received. There are rabbis who think, like Moses, the Messiah is going to be rejected, become hidden, and then received. So these three stages of ministry is repeated throughout the Old Testament. David followed this pattern. He was anointed as king. He hid and then was received. And you see this in Joseph as well, in Genesis. In fact, Acts 7 with St. Stephen draws these parallels to preach to the Jews, saying, you've rejected all these prophets, and you rejected Jesus, and drew all these similarities, concluding a prophet like Moses. So in other words, some of these prophets are seen as prophetic parallels to the life of Jesus and other Old Testament characters. So the difference being the slavery in which he came to deliver us from was not the slavery of Egypt, but the slavery of sin. I say to you, whoever commits sin is the slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you are free indeed. And that's in John 8:34. So Jesus delivers us from a much greater evil than that of Egypt. Okay, when I read about this, I got super excited because we have an exact time period for the coming of the Messiah. David 9 gives us the day of his entrance. Daniel 9 gives us the day of his entrance into Jerusalem. And I would love to kind of nitpick through these verses, but won't tonight. But please check out this QR code. Mike Wiegner does a very, very good interpretation of those verses, showing how precisely the time period has been prophesied so many years before the coming of Jesus. Even the Talmud, written after the time of Jesus, says something quite striking. The Messiah did not come after 4,000 years passed, and furthermore, the years that elapsed since then, which were to have been the Messianic era, have elapsed. They say it's simply too late for the Messiah to come now. The prophecies point to a certain time period, and it has passed. So this is a fascinating claim made by the Jews. Okay, Micah 5:2. We have the birthplace. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from the old, from everlasting. So this pre-existing being gets born, fits so perfectly with kind of Christian theology. Christ, for every record we have, is born in Bethlehem. Nothing to the contrary. Even King Herod, he asked the scribes, where is this Messiah expected to be born? And they unanimously would reply, Bethlehem. So we're already starting to really narrow down the identity of this Messiah. But not only the birthplace, we have a forerunner. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom we speak will suddenly come to his temple. This temple. So during Malachi's writing is the second temple. What happened to the second temple? It's destroyed. When? 70 AD. Okay, so where is Messiah? So there's an issue here. The Messiah must have come before 70 AD. So many other very particular events happened, prophesied to happen, including his entrance into Jerusalem. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." So when this was fulfilled, everyone knew what was happening. That's why it triggered the Pharisees so much, which triggered, of course, the crucifixion. So the Talmud also has a very interesting exchange about this passage. It says, Rabbi Hillel says, "There is no Messiah coming for the Jewish people, as they already ate from him, as all the prophecies relating to the Messiah were already fulfilled during the days of Hezekiah." Rav Yusuf says, "May the master forgive Rabbi Hillel for stating matters with no basis. With regard to Ezekiel, when was his reign? It was during the first temple period, whereas Zechariah, yes, the prophet prophesied during the second temple period and said, 'Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey.'" So it's really an amazing exchange here. In other words, even Jewish thought highlighted this verse as a messianic passage. Then we'll look at the virgin birth. "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." So some say this is actually just a young maiden who will conceive, not a virgin. But you have to kind of ask, well, is that really a sign if a young maiden falls pregnant? But when a virgin maiden falls pregnant, now that's a sign. But the point here is not to prove the virgin birth, but there is only one candidate that I'm aware of set in history that at least has a claim to fulfilling this passage, and that is Jesus. So we'll look at a miracle worker. "He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb sing." Again, this doesn't prove Jesus performed miracles, but you at least have the accounts that say he performed the miracles. Even we've seen outside of the Bible these claims being made. Even those against him, the Pharisees and other scribes, would not claim that he didn't do miracles, but would dedicate it to or explain it away through kind of demonic powers. But the claim is still there that he did miracles. He was a miracle worker. So many passages kind of also talk about the Messiah being rejected by his own people in Psalm 118, 22, Isaiah 53. And the rejection is not just by a nation, but a friend. And exactly how much for? So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver, and the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. That princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. So this passage was fulfilled in great detail. The money is thrown into the house of the Lord, but doesn't go to the Lord. Where does it go? The potter. So Judas takes the money, feels guilty, goes back, say, I can't take this money. The Jews say, well, we can't take that money. It's blood money. Then he throws the money where? At the temple, in the house of the Lord, and then runs off, commits suicide, and soils the field. So the money is then used to buy that field for the burial of strangers, and now that field is the potter's field. So such an intricately detailed fulfillment of prophecy here. Another very detailed account is found in these very popular passages, Psalm 22, Isaiah 52, and 53. The manner of death is so amazingly detailed and with lots of particulars reflecting accurately what happened to Jesus as a public death, with crowds against him, stretched out, dehydrated, beaten, pierced hands and feet. So please read through these passages and you will find yourself at the feet of Jesus. But now I would like to go to something that is sometimes overlooked. Prophecies that prophesy how much of an impact Jesus will have on the world. Only Jesus had this impact. It says, he will not fail nor be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastline shall wait for his law. Indeed, he says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. It was not considered enough to only save the Israelites, but the world. The Messiah will extend the truth and knowledge of God to the ends of the world. So Michael Brown, author of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, has an amazing quote which I would like to read to you. Consider how utterly absurd it would have been if you stood at the foot of the cross as Jesus suffered a torturous, ignominious, shameful death, and someone told you 2,000 years from now, this man will be the world's most famous Jew, and world history will be divided into the years before his birth and the years after his birth. Hundreds of millions of people from all world religions will forsake their idols and their deities and traditions, and instead will become followers of the God of Israel. Through him. Yes, this is the literal truth without hint of exaggeration. We dare not downplay the significance of this, and remember that it was in Psalm 22 that the worldwide impact of Messiah's death and resurrection were foretold. The scriptures plainly declaring that as a result of his deliverance from death, the Gentiles would turn to the one true God. So, as of 2021, 2.38 billion people across the world declare themselves as Christian. No human being has had such an impact as Jesus had on earth. Okay, so let's recap and connect these prophetic dots we've discussed. So number one, he's a man from the tribe of Judah, descendant of David, a king like Moses. We have an exact time period, born in Bethlehem, a forerunner, enters Jerusalem on a donkey, has a virgin birth, he's a miracle worker, he is sold for 30 pieces of silver. His manner of death is so explicitly foretold. Anything else? There's so much more. We have 351 prophecies that have been fulfilled by Jesus. It quite simply is Jesus or nobody. And those are just direct prophecies. There are images and pictures such as the life of Moses, Joseph, King David, Jonah. Jesus is the meta-narrative of the whole Bible. There are narratives and there are meta-narratives. It's like when small events in a movie or a TV show happen and you piece them together and you reach the meta-narrative, the overarching theme of the whole season. So all these different characters are parallels of Jesus. They paint over and over and over again the image of Jesus. So the details of the laws, to the duties of the high priest, the design of the temple itself, they all picture Christ. All parallels of Christ. So it's not just 351 direct prophecies, it's throughout Scripture, this image of Jesus. So this scroll is the QR code if you want to check it out. It's really interesting because you have the New Testament where it's fulfilled as well as the Old Testament prophecies. But, listen to this. It's just a coincidence, right? The numbers are laughable. Let's have a look. So, Professor Peter Stoner used the science of probability to examine the chances of just 8 prophecies being fulfilled by one person. And they were super generous with the statistics. They said, for example, 1 in 100 Jewish men ride a donkey into Jerusalem proclaiming to be king. 1 in 100. So he took 8 of those kind of prophecies. So what he found, that probability would be 1 in 10 to the 17. So what does this 10 with a little 17 next to it mean? That's what it means. Can we imagine that number? It's a bit hard to imagine this number. So to help imagine this number, I want you to imagine Texas. So this is Texas, an outline of Texas over Europe. So it's quite big, Texas, actually. Bigger than Germany, bigger than France. It's taken up quite a big portion of Europe. Then I want you to imagine a silver dollar coin. So it's about a centimeter bigger than a 10p coin. A bit thicker. It's about 13 millimeters thick, I think. And then I want you to imagine all these coins laid nicely out on the whole surface of Texas. Not just one layer, 240 layers. That's 10 to the 17. And then I want you to imagine you're walking around Texas, and I've marked one of these coins, and you have one chance to pick up the coin that I've marked. That's the chances of one person just happening to fulfill just 8 of the prophecies. Just 8. We have 351 prophecies. So then he thought, okay, what if we take 40 of these prophecies? What are the chances that 40 prophecies are fulfilled by one person? So we get this number, 1 in 10 to the 157, which looks like that. It's a big number. I don't know what this one's called. But in bold, that's 1 in 10 to the 17. So, big difference. So how are we going to imagine this number? So we'll start with an electron. How big are electrons? Well, they're quite small. But if you crush electrons into a 1-inch line, you get 9 million electrons, 19 million electrons. If you crush them into 1 square inch, you get 10 to the 18. So you remember Texas with coins, times that by 10, that's 1 inch. Now I want you to fill the whole universe with electrons. So 20 billion light years packed with electrons. And I've marked one of these electrons, and you have to zoom around the universe and pick the right one. That's the probability of one person fulfilling just 40 prophecies. Just 40. This is not a coincidence, guys. This didn't just happen. So we're kind of left with a dilemma here. Either Jesus is the Messiah, or there is no Messiah. Jesus is the fulfillment, and God has been at work through Jesus expanding the truth throughout the world for the past 2,000 years, or God has done almost nothing for 2,000 years. So I want to leave you with the question to ponder. Jesus is the Messiah. God has given us good reason to believe. We have the Old and New Testament affirming one another through foretelling of prophecy and fulfillment of prophecies. And as a bonus, it not only proclaims the messianic identity of Jesus, but also the intrinsically divine nature of Scripture. So this is the question I have for you. Jesus is the prophesied Messiah and your personal Savior. So what are you going to do about it?